Welcome to the Wish I'd Known Then podcast, where we focus on how authors found success, looking at strategies that have taken them to the top of the bestseller charts, as well as what they've learned from their mistakes. Because being an indie author is more than knowing the latest marketing trend. It's about being innovative and creative and learning from your mistakes.
Welcome to the Wish I'd Known Then podcast. I'm Sarah Rosette.
And I'm Jamie Albright. And this week on the show we have
A.G. Riddle.
Yes, we do. It is such a fun interview. He is hilarious. You know, there's just some people you meet and you click with, and Jerry is one of those people for me. We just, I enjoy his sense of humor, and he puts up with me. And so, it's a great interview.
Yeah, we had a good time in this interview. He's a very low-key person. But he has some great ideas. As you'll hear, he has a great marketing plan for he and Jamie. To work together. But yeah, we had a great time talking to him about he started pretty early. And so we talk a lot about how in the indie timeline, his books came out in 2013, I think his first one, and talked about how he's been successful over the long term.
Right.
And he's kind of gone through some different transitions in his career as he's gone from indie to trad. And we talked about, just the changes in the market and how things are now and what he would do differently if he was starting over. So it's really good.
And the fact
information.
is, A.G. Riddle is a big name in sci-fi publishing. It just is, and sci-fi tech thrillers. And when we met him at this mastermind we were at, he wasn't going by A.G. He was going by Jerry. I didn't know who he was for the first day. He's so unassuming. You would not. He's really cool guy. Cool guy. So, and very smart, just very, very smart.
Yeah. So that's coming up. We have no new supporters this week, but thanks to all our continuing supporters.
Yes.
And by the time this goes out, we will have already done our supporter chat.
Yes.
So we'll have another one probably in September.
Yes.
If you missed that. But, if you want to support the podcast, you can go to wishidknownforwriters.com/support.
Yep.
So
you can. And also we now have an email address for the podcast because we keep getting submissions on our personal, our on our author emails, which is fine. But they're I looked everywhere and didn't find an email. Yeah. So it's wishidknownthenforwriters@gmail.com.
Yes. And that is something that I did not even think about till now, which shows you
3 years,
easy to miss
3.5
things.
years.
Yeah.
So if you have questions or if you have show ideas or if you want to make a pitch,
guest suggestions,
all those things.
Yeah.
You can go there.
What have you been doing lately?
Well, I was on a cruise last week or Thursday to Monday with my daughter. It's her birthday, and she's my youngest, and we just haven't had a chance to really get away together like I have with my older daughter. And so we went and we had a blast, and it was just very relaxing and fun, and we laughed a lot. We cried a little, and it's just kind of the whole thing. And we relaxed a lot. We took several naps. The first day I was like, I'm just going to nap at the pool. So I did. But then the next day we went back to the room, turned the lights off, and we had an interior cabin. So it was very dark. We opened the bathroom door and had to set an alarm, or we would have slept probably straight through dinner because we were
when you were pulling back into port, you'd be like, oh, wait, gotta get going.
Yeah, gotta get going. Oh gosh. And then so I was doing that, and that's really all, I think. I'm going to be at NEEK representing the podcast. So if you guys are going to be there, come say hi. And that's at the end of September. So
and that's in St. Pete.
It's
Florida.
in St. Pete, Florida. Yeah. My cousin lives there, and so I may get to see he and his wife. So that's cool. They just moved there, so that's kind of cool. Yeah. So
that'll work out good.
Yeah, that's all that's going on with me. Not much.
Okay. Well, for me, it is all Kickstarter all the time. I'm down to like it. So we're recording this on Wednesday. It ends next Tuesday. So I cut down from I think it did 17 days last time. So this time I'm doing 14.
Yeah.
And so over the halfway point, and it's doing great. It's like
that's awesome.
14K, which is like,
wow.
Yeah. I mean, I'm amazed, and it's doing great. And it's just, some people plan everything, and they have like all their emails and all their updates there, because you can go into the campaign and do an update just for supporters. And some people do all that before, and I just can't do that. I have to do it kind of in the moment. So, because I just can't pre-write an email that's like, yay, we hit the first stretch goal. When you're like, are we going to hit the first stretch goal? I just can't do it. I shouldn't be able to, because I'm a writer.
Yeah.
I am a writer. I can make things up. I just can't do that. So I've been doing a lot of that, like just keeping up with like what's going on, sending out updates, and answering some questions about, supporters always have questions. So that's pretty much what I've been doing. And and working on some copy edits for the book when it'll go out to everyone when the campaign ends, and, just doing all those little nitnoid things that have to be done.
Right.
Like to put out a book out, so it's hard to, I definitely recommend having your book written before you do the Kickstarter. It just cuts down on so much stress. And we talk about that a little bit in this interview about like, if you can bank a book, that can really help things not be so stressful.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, and the other thing I have to say is I finished Extraordinary Attorney Woo. Highly recommend it. It's very good.
Okay. Yeah. I will put that on my list of things to watch.
It's a legal drama, and I'm not usually into legal dramas. And it's got a romance subplot, but it's a lot about the cases that are going on. Very unusual. Like if you watch American legal dramas, it's not the same, because it's not like the big dramatic murder case. It's like quirky cases. And I really enjoyed like the way the themes and stuff. It was very good. It was very well done. And
that's great.
In a way, it kind of reminds me of like a Hallmark movie type thing. The K-dramas are very squeaky clean.
Yeah.
So it's just totally different viewing experience from some of the stuff I usually watch. I really liked it. So
that's
good.
Great. That's great. Yeah, it'd be nice change from my true crime murder podcast.
It's a little bit lighter than that.
24/7. Yeah.
A little bit lighter than that.
Well, that is awesome. And we should probably get on with the interview, because Jerry's got some great things to say.
Yes, let's do it. All right. So here is Jerry. Well, today we are so happy to have A.G. Riddle with us. Hi, Jerry. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you for having me.
Yes, we have the A.G. Riddle with us.
We're excited to talk to you today. Let me read your bio and we'll get right into the questions. A.G. Riddle spent 10 years starting and running internet companies before retiring to focus on his true passion, writing fiction. He is the author of 10 novels that have sold nearly 5 million copies worldwide in 20 languages. He lives in North Carolina.
Wow.
That's an impressive bio.
He writes very succinctly, apparently. Yeah. Or at least in bios. The books have gotten more.
That's good. That's the best for podcast intros, actually.
That's right, actually. We appreciate those. Tell us how you got into writing, Jerry.
Well, I guess I got into it as this is a second career for me. It was something that, reading science fiction is something I really loved in my first career. And I thought I wanted to do something that was a little more creative. And I got into it as sort of an experiment to see where it would go. And spent 2.5 years writing my first novel, and I've been doing it since.
That's great. And you indie published those first novels, right?
I did, yeah. I've written, I guess, 12, and indie published 10. I don't know, we could do the math, but it's something.
Yeah.
But you were pretty early on, right, in the indie timeline?
Yeah. My first novel, I self-published it on Amazon on March 27th of 2013. And like I said, I started in 2011 working on it. So it was, pretty early.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, we always like to ask everyone, what is your definition of success?
Well, I think it's a great question. And I'm of the opinion that everyone should define success for them, because I think that um, I'm a big believer that trying to adopt someone else's standard for yourself is inherently unhealthy, and sort of leads to a lot of conflicts, because, someone who's later in life, who's retired, who looks at writing as a hobby, their definition of success may be writing the book that they want to write and telling the story they want to tell, or winning a literary award. And then someone with, a mortgage and 2 kids in college who writes as a full-time occupation, the definition of success might be paying your mortgage and the tuition and things like that. And so I think my personal definition of success at this point in my life, which I think is probably a little different than it was when I began my career. And I think your definition of success doesn't have to be, chiseled in stone. Like, it can change as your life changes. But, at this point, I have a wife and 2 kids, and my thinking on the subject is that, am I fulfilling the obligations I've made in life and my commitments? And then as a second, because as a science fiction author, I like to complicate everything. As a second level to that is, am I writing books that I'm proud of, that I think are important, that, say something and leave the reader better than they were.
Yeah.
And then third would be, do I feel fulfilled doing this work? And I still do. Like, I still love writing. I like writing a lot more than I like maybe the business of writing and all the other things that come with it. But I guess that's sort of how I look at success for myself these days.
I think that's great. And we hear that a lot from authors, that it changes over time. When you first start, you have one definition, and then, or as your life changes and stuff. So I think those are great answers.
I liked your kind of tiered explanation too, because it is kind of layered, where you have certain things that you want to achieve, but then there's other factors in there. I think that's very healthy way to look at it.
It's never as simple as I want this right
X.
here.
It's never as simple as that, for sure. So what do you wish you'd known about writing and craft when you got started?
Well, I guess there's a lot of things. I mean, some of the sort of easy ones are, when I started, I was a 32-year-old guy who was, married with no kids.
Yeah.
And, now we've got 2 kids. And I think that your life changes so much. I mean, it just becomes, I love my kids and I love the time I spend with them, but it does get harder to write. And I think that I wish I had written more earlier in my career. I like to think that I'm a better writer now. I think that's debatable in some of the reviews, but my thought was that I'll get better over time and I'll have plenty of time to write all these stories that I want to write. But I think that's one thing. I think I probably underestimated how important advertising was going to be, especially either on social media or on the retailers. I sort of underestimated the balance between organic visibility and paid visibility. And I think it's shifted a great deal towards paid on all platforms. The amount of monetization happening is pretty incredible.
Right.
And so those are the 2 that stick out. And then I think in general, in my past career, work-life balance had never been a real big problem. I mean, I was a bachelor in that career, and I was young and healthy, and, I'm blessed to be fairly healthy now, but it's like, 10 years into writing, I think taking care of yourself, your physical and mental health, become as big of a challenge as writing books. And so I don't know, I think trying to be cognizant of that, it feels pretty important these days. And I think that's a big, like, the healthier you are mentally and physically, I think it is a multiplier effect for your work. You're gonna have better output, you're gonna have more output, and your focus is going to be better.
Right.
And you're going to have longevity in the career.
Right. And for authors like me who are more extroverted than introverted, I think there is a danger of being in my head so much, because in my past, I'm not really used to that. And now when I I will find myself in the middle of a thought or conversation and just say something out loud, and my husband thinks maybe I need some, medical help, because I just am in my head so much, especially when I'm like, like right before I start writing or in the beginning of writing, I'm just in my head a lot, and I have a hard time cutting that off when I get up from the computer, so, but I think it's something to think about for sure. Mental health is always important.
Well, it's incredibly hard for me too, especially when I'm drafting a novel. I mean, I'm inside that novel. I mean, you walk out of the room and it's just like, I don't think other professions are quite that consuming. I mean, it's hard to really mentally compartmentalize and then be like, all right, I'm sitting down at dinner with my family. I'm still thinking about those characters, still thinking about, I could actually do this a little differently in this scene. And I'm going to go write that while I've got it fresh in my mind. It's like,
right.
Honey, I'm going to the bathroom,
hard.
and then you're in there with the computer.
Yeah. It's kind of like you've got this fog around you that you're constantly thinking about things, and it's like, oh, that I find that too when I'm drafting. It's very difficult to.
It is
just turn that off, because everything I'm doing, I'm like watching a show or going to the grocery store. I'm like, oh, that person, I could use that description, or oh, that's a good plot twist. It's really hard to separate that out, but it is good to do that.
I would think writing sci-fi would be difficult too, because I know the readers can be really, critical if you don't get the science right, if you don't get the, just the technology right. And, the good thing about like fantasy is you can make up your own stuff, but science and technology is a little bit different. And I know I read Winter World, and it had, a lot of that in it, and you got to be careful. So you have to do a lot of extra stuff too, because they'll get you in the reviews. It's what I've heard.
Yes, I've also heard that and read it several thousand times at this point. I have the scars and the cuts to prove it. But yeah, I mean, that is, I think, an added layer. I think it helps readers suspend disbelief. If they read something scientific, especially if it's something they personally know about and have seen either in their career or at some point in life. And I think getting the details right is important. And then it's a double-edged sword. Like sometimes readers are convinced of something, and they read something in the book that contradicts that, and it's like you don't really have any back and forth. Like that book is all you've got, so they go write a review that says this is not correct, and I've found at this point in my career, like if I see a detail where I'm like, well, I know some readers are gonna. I mean, there's so much detail you can put in that is helpful, and then there's a point at which it becomes counterproductive, where people are like, too much detail, got to move the plot along. But I actually tend to focus more on the story and the characters now, and less on the details, just because they just end up being landmines for some readers. And I don't know what those readers are reading, but I do hope they find something they enjoy. I mean, they stay manuals or what, but it's a drag to write too sometimes.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned earlier, like paid versus organic marketing. And so that's another one of our questions. What do you wish you had known about marketing? Maybe more about that or some other aspect?
Yeah, I mean, I really only do Amazon ads at this point, and I, pretty deep knowledge and experience in Amazon ads, but social media ads I've never really done on any scale. I mean, I've probably spent a couple of $100s in my 10-year career.
Wow.
And I think to Jamie's point, she's an extrovert. I'm probably like on the other end of the spectrum, introverted. And so I'm not terribly social. And so the platforms are not something that I really still don't really get on and use a lot. And so I wish I probably should have early in my career, studied social media advertising and used it a little more. I mean, I think it's probably less effective than it was in years past.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, but the time to to have used it would have been back then. And so, but it's in this career, we see opportunities come and go. And I think you gotta, I guess my thought on it back then was, just focus on what you're good at. And, the things I felt I was good at was writing the novels, and then Amazon ads at the time seemed to be a little more scientific or a little more data driven. And, that was more of a strong suit for me versus the social aspects or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's important, because to think about, am I going to enjoy this? Because like you were saying, that was one of your things that you wanted. That's a way that you define success, is, are you enjoying the writing? And if you're having to spend your time on a platform that you don't enjoy, then that's going to suck the joy out of it anyway. Right. So I think if you can find a marketing channel that you can do and you can excel in that, then that's probably a great choice, versus forcing yourself to do something you hate.
Yeah. Because it drains your energy. And
it does.
It's terrible.
Well, what assumptions did you make at the beginning of your writing career, and looking back, did they turn out to be right or wrong?
Well, I made one big assumption, which is that, and this may, I think this is a subject of debate, but my assumption was that I would get better over time. That, when I started out, that I wouldn't be the best writer of dialogue or the best at plotting or a lot of things that I felt I needed experience to do. But I felt that the one thing that I could do was the science and history really well. And I felt that there weren't as many novels in the marketplace that were heavy in science and history, sort of Dan Brown, Michael Crichton style novels, because they're very challenging to write. And then they're challenging, I think, from a psychological standpoint, to deal with all the the toxic reviews and the sort of depression in the market. But I made the decision to sort of focus on what I felt to be my strengths, and then to just avoid my limitations. I didn't write a romantic comedy or a mystery thriller or a literary fiction novel, because I didn't feel that I was really up to the task at that point. And obviously I delude myself, but I like to think I've gotten better over time and all the other things. But and I think the other choice that I made was I looked at all the genres that I personally enjoyed. And, I love the more hardcore science fiction of space adventure or time travel or alternate history. But I chose to write science fiction thrillers that were very deep in science and history, because I felt it was an underserved market, and I felt that I could do it well enough and that it would be a success. I knew myself well enough to know that if the book didn't take off, that I would sort of lose interest in this second career, and it would either become a hobby or something. So those are, I guess, picking my genre, and then among something that I felt that I could write sustainably, and then trying to align that with my own strengths and limitations.
Right. I think that's great. Great answer. P.S. If you ever want to write a romantic comedy, Jamie Albright and A.G. Riddle writing a rom-com.
That's the ultimate crossover readers have been waiting for, and we're announcing it right here, right.
It'll be out in 2024, right?
Jamie Riddle, that's right.
Early 20. We might even get it out by Christmas as a special. So
yeah.
That alien comedy, alien romantic comedy that you didn't know you
didn't know you needed. That's
you
right.
didn't know you needed, but you do. That's hilarious.
There you go.
Oh gosh,
that
you make me laugh.
I think it would be awesome.
It's honestly not the worst idea I've ever had for a story.
Well, what's the most important lesson you've learned?
Well, I think it's probably to focus on the things you can control and then stop worrying about everything else.
Yeah.
I mean, this career is like flying a jumbo jet. I mean, there's just so many buttons and switches and just dials, and it's like there's so much noise, and it's like, at the end of the day, I mean, really, honestly, the only two things I do is write books and run Amazon ads. I mean, it's just like, and I listen to other people, and their knowledge is so broad, and there's so many things. I mean, your head can spin if you think about, there's Patreon, Substack, MailerLite, it's like Shopify. I mean, it's so many things. And I think it's just figure out what you're good at and do those things and do them as well as you can and try to stay sane. I mean, that's the job.
That really is very wise right there, because there are so many things. I remember we met at a little mini conference mastermind, the three of us. And I do remember you saying, I'm listening to all of you and my head is like, like I don't do any of this stuff.
I knew or had a cursory, I knew that some of these things existed and everybody's
exactly.
Like, they've got a PhD and all this stuff. And I'm like, I do think that, frankly, my knowledge of all these things is pretty shallow. But I also think, I've found the things that work for me. And I think
exactly.
If you see somebody doing something they're having, like TikTok video, I'm never going to be a TikToker. I don't have a TikTok account. I've never been on TikTok. I don't, the idea.
You probably don't even know how to spell TikTok.
It's got like 1 or 2 Ks. I've heard.
It's good.
Yeah, so there you go. And no Cs. Maybe. Anyway, I think, but it's like, you see someone having success with something, and I think in this business, you got to ask yourself, man, is that for me? And
that's right.
If it's not, it's okay not to do it.
Well, I only brought that up because you do have the things that you're good at and you do those. And I think that that's so wise, because a lot of us do chase
everything.
Everything. Yeah, exactly.
And it's hard not to in this career.
It is.
Because part of the business is, I think people in general, like in business, I went to Chapel Hill as a business major. And one of the things that I found so fascinating is this fear of loss. And it was like a Publishers Weekly, like they would mail you something and say, you've already won. And if you don't do something, you're going to lose what you already have. Right. Yeah, and so I think a lot of human psychology is driven by this fear of losing what you have or losing your position. And this idea that here's this new opportunity that everyone's capitalizing on. And if you don't get on this train, it leaves the station and you're going to miss out forever. Yeah. And I think there's a powerful gravity about something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Resist. Yes. Is my thinking. Resist trying to jump on that train. So what's the biggest change in your thinking that you've had to make over the years?
Well, I think for me, it's become probably when I started out in 2013 that this job was pretty simple. I mean, you write the books and I upload them to Amazon exclusive back then. It was pretty simple. And like my biggest challenge was learning the craft of writing and trying to get better with every book. I think now it's, the business is a lot more complex. And this thing we've talked about of trying to figure out what to focus on, and specifically for me, trying to find this balance between advertising and writing books and trying to find the combination, which I'm still trying to figure out, which is, is it traditional publishing or is it self-publishing or is it some combination? And then how much time to spend on ads versus writing versus self-care and things like that. I think the balancing act becomes maybe a little tougher. And I also think to a certain extent trying to figure out, like, when you're starting your career, you're very fortunate in a sense of you can kind of define what your body of work or what your brand is about, right? Like you're writing that first novel and you can write it for yourself.
Right.
But I think you have to sort of publish it to align with your goals and what your definition of success. And so it's okay to write a book for yourself and then edit it to be more commercial or to be more, literary or whatever you want. And then, so I think for me, looking at, all right, well, this is what readers expect of an A.G. Riddle novel, and then trying to think about, well, what am I really excited about writing, and trying to be, I think, respectful of readers and trying to keep myself sort of engaged in writing the best books I can. I think as you get deeper in your career, that does become a challenge.
Yeah.
And that's why we're doing the alien invasion romantic comedy to totally mix it up and alienate the readership who are like, what has happened to A.G. Riddle?
And Jamie Albright.
Well, that's why you're using a pen name, right?
It's happened to Jamie. That's why we're doing Jamie Riddle. I mean, it really works. It's as good or better than A.G. Riddle.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true. It really flows. It rolls off the tongue. Yeah.
That's great.
Well, I love it. I would pre-order it right now.
Yeah, I just put it up for pre-order.
Okay. Awesome. Well, if you were starting over today, what would you do differently? We've got a lot of new writers who listen to the podcast, and we like to ask established authors this because, like if you could go back and start over, what would you do differently?
Well, I think I would probably try to plan for my success a little more, and I would probably, we joke about this, but the pen name A.G. Riddle was really so A.G. is Anna and Jerry. It's my wife's name and my name, and then Riddle. I knew I wanted a pen name because I'm very private and very introverted. But I probably would have done Jerry something. I don't know what. So I would have changed my pen name. But when I released the book, it was pretty homemade. Like I wrote the book, I did the cover myself, my mom edited it, and then it really was kind of I've been working on it so long. My wife was like, "You got to release this, or you're going to lose your mind. And we need to figure out if this is any good." Like she liked it, and I felt like I'd done some good work. And I don't know. So I would have probably hired a professional editor, and I think these are all things that are commonly known now. But I probably would have banked a couple of the novels. Like I had I had an outline for my trilogy, and I had maybe a quarter of the second book written when the first one came out. But it's like the amount of scrambling I did after that book came out. Like I had to re-edit the first book. I was writing the second one, and it was just like hire a cover artist. Like just it felt very overwhelming, and very stressful. So I think thinking about your launch and release and being very purposeful about those things feels very important. And then obviously we're in a market that's very different. I mean, it was, I think, a lot easier to succeed in 2013 than now. There's no question. Right. And then, you really need to be, you got to come with the best you can when you release, especially if you're new to the market.
Right. That's true. Now, were your first books, were they a series or were they just standalones?
It was a trilogy. Yeah.
It was a trilogy. So I think that's good too, to bank those books, because if you figure out you need to change something, or your science or your whatever technology doesn't match, then it's easier to change them before you've released them than if you've released them and have to make everything work. So I tell people that all the time too. Yeah. I didn't do that myself, but don't do what I do. So the first books you released, well, all your books you released were indie, and then you went trad published, correct? When did you do that?
So I'd always been traditionally published in the UK in print, the UK and Commonwealth, so Australia, Canada. And then I'd sort of published an ebook, self-published, from the beginning. Yeah. And then I sold my fourth book to HarperCollins, and then I went back to self-publishing. And then, I don't know, at the end of, I don't know when it was, 3 years ago, I was feeling pretty overwhelmed and trying to figure out, like, what is the right combination for me? And so I let my UK publisher have global English rights in ebook and print. And then my audiobooks have always been traditionally published. I've never self-published an audiobook, but and so I've been trying that as an experiment. And I think, I'm still evaluating that and trying to figure out the right path. And I think the traditional publishing, I've learned a lot about that as well. And I think there's certainly positives and negatives. And I think I think there's much better authorities on the subject than me, but I think you have to sort of line all those things up and see how it fits with what you're trying to do.
Yeah. What do you wish you'd known about that?
Well, I guess I wish I had known, for me, coming I started an internet company in college and did that for 10 years. And then in publishing, there was never any thought in my mind of getting an agent or querying an agent or a publisher when I first started. What I knew was selling things on the internet. And so it seemed self-evident to just upload the book to the internet and see what people thought of it. And that's what I did. And so I think that, when you go from being completely autonomous, to having, all right, I now get to decide when this book comes out, what the title is, what the description is, what it's going to be priced, the whole thing. And then you go to a situation where you've got, your agent and your publisher in the mix. And I'll say that, my publisher is very good. Like a lot of things they came up with were better than what I was thinking. So I have to concede that, and the work they've done on the cover and a lot of things, the doors they have opened for me have been incredible. But I think that it's a very different operating environment, especially for someone coming from self-publishing who's used to sort of having a lot of freedom. And I also think that the schedule at which traditional publishers want to publish the books can be a little stifling. And so it's like, the book that came out in March, I wrote 2 years ago. And so I think, some of what you lose, I think, or at least for me, is a little of the enthusiasm and momentum. I mean, you write a book, you finish it, you edit it, and then 2 years later it comes out, and you're literally thinking, some of the things people write in reviews, I don't even remember it from the book. I mean, because it's so long ago. And I think in certain circumstances, like if you're writing a series, having these long breaks, there's a large group of the audience that is not for that anymore. I mean, they want these to come out in short order and at pace, especially in ebook. But anyway, so I think it's trying to balance this. Where's your audience? Is it principally online and ebook and in series, or are they standalones in print and in bookstores? And those sort of decisions, I think for a lot of people probably drive the whole traditional self-published, and then how good are you at working with people? And I mean, I think I'm okay at it, but I don't know. There's something about writing a book and having it come out 2 years later that's sort of I don't know.
It's difficult.
That's difficult. Yeah.
And then if your readers know they have to wait a year, sometimes it's really hard. I think it's really hard to keep that momentum going.
Yeah.
I think so. And it's a little anticlimactic.
Yeah.
That's true. Well, so you mentioned since we're talking about the slower kind of release schedule for trad publishing, so it seems like your pace is a little bit slower than some authors for like releasing. Even, I don't know if you were indie publishing, if it would be quicker, or do you feel like you write your books are pretty big and pretty dense, right? So it takes you a little bit longer. So do you have any advice for people who, write, maybe don't release like every month or every quarter, maybe on the slower release schedule?
Yeah. I mean, I think on the spectrum, I'm certainly one of the less frequently releasing indies, but I've written about a book a year on average, maybe a little more. But what I would say is that you can make anything work. I mean, Colleen Hoover doesn't have a huge catalog, but she's doing very well.
She's doing all right.
And then, you look at someone's release schedule, and I'm a big believer that every author has their comfortable pace that they can write at and write the best books they can write at. And so I think adopting someone else's pace of like, oh, this person's writing a book a month, is going to probably get you in trouble. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't try it out writing faster and see if it works for you. May or may not. And I wouldn't judge it until you try it. But so for me, writing the techno thrillers and the sci-fi thrillers, it takes a little time. And then if you're writing a series, the world building, setting up the characters, and getting that first novel right takes a lot of time. Writing a second or third novel takes a lot less time, and it should take a lot less time. And I think in general, in the market we're in, if you're writing a series, I don't think these long gaps between the books is helpful for the author or the reader or the algorithms or anything in between. So I think look, if you're writing standalones, that you think are a big book, and you takes a lot of time to research, you can take the time you want, as long as the audience is there and it's doing what you want. On the series front, I'm of a different mind that you should be releasing a little more frequently.
I think that's
Makes
very
sense.
wise. Yeah. Gosh, very wise, Jerry. You're so wise.
I read that
Super
somewhere
wise.
online this morning.
I thought you did. Probably I
I
said
got my
it
notes
and
up
you
here.
said it. Yeah.
I read it on your website or Sarah's, but I can't remember. But well done, ladies.
Thank you. So you mentioned this earlier, that you write these sci-fi thrillers, techno thrillers, and they take a lot of research, but now you concentrate more on the story. Like, how do you make that decision? At what point do you think, okay, this is boring, or this is too light on the tech, or too light on the sci-fi, or do you rely on your editor to tell you that?
Well, it's a good question, and I don't think that's really one of the toughest calls in the whole thing, because like early on, my guide was my wife would read the books, and she's just like, you got pages and pages of stuff. You got to either cut this out or reduce the amount of information. These info dumps are just destroying the momentum in this book. And it's, as authors, I think, obviously we're all tend to be too close to our work, but I think especially for us sci-fi thriller people, because it's like, you've done the work, you've researched this, and you want to turn it in and say, look, I've done this work. See here, I know about this. If it makes people believe the character, I think it's probably helpful. If it reveals something about the world, or some technology or device that impacts the plot, then it probably wants to be in there. Or if it makes the world more unique. So I think for me, it's becoming, I hope and think that I've become better at spotting the things that are helpful to the novel and do enhance the reader experience. And I don't know, I guess I also think I just in reading the reviews have sort of learned things that are probably going to be divisive for audiences, that they're going to argue about, or something like that. I mean, there's certainly some downsides to it, but I think it's an art, not a science, of how much science to put in, and it's a challenge.
Probably comes from experience too. And as you learn your readers better too,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I think, like, whatever you do, if you're consistent with that, that's the type of reader you're going to draw to yourself. So like, if you're very into like the Tom Clancy thrillers, they're like so detailed on, like, there are readers who enjoy that. And so if you consistently do that, then that will be the kind of readership you have. And it just over time kind of snowballs, I guess. And it's hard when you're starting out to figure out what your blend is, I guess, for these things.
It is. And I do think one of the toughest things starting out is establishing that brand, that expectation. But I think honoring them with readers is super important. I mean, to your point, like if you're writing Tom Clancy style novels, I think don't want to convert to then just something that's, cartoonish or something very different. It's like it.
Right.
I used to always be very confused why an author would just kind of write the same type novel over and over again. God, that must be so boring. I get it now. Like I have no questions on that subject anymore.
We today we're doing this interview on Wednesday, and so today our interview with Kat Moran. Kat Mora. I know who we interview all the time. But anyway, Kat Mora, and she talks about that. She talks about, giving the readers exactly what they want over and over again. And the challenge for you is to do it so you're not bored. So,
exactly. Yeah. I do think that is the challenge.
Yeah.
See, I read her show notes too, and that's where I got that piece.
She's pretty smart.
She's a good person to listen to.
Yeah, she is.
Yeah. Well, we always like to ask everybody, what is the best thing they've done to set themselves up for success?
Well, I think for me, it's probably been studying the craft very extensively, before I got started. And and having this mindset of being a constant learner. Like I'm constantly trying to learn some way to do this better. And I think that mindset is helpful. I think, the minute we think we've got this figured out, we're probably setting ourselves up for failure. And so I think that's important. And then trying to balance that with focus, because you can learn about all this new stuff and try to chase all this new stuff. But at the end of the day, you got to take a look and say, well, that's interesting, but is it for me? And if it is, I think you go try to figure it out.
Yeah, I think that's a next level skill where like you're learning stuff and then you're able to say, oh, this won't work for me. Or, that's something that I think that's hard to do.
It is.
Figure out what to pursue.
It is. It's very hard. So tell people where they can find all about you or the things you want them to know and your books.
White Stalker Van. agriddle.com is the website. It's just like agriddle.com. And it's got all the goodies on there.
Very good. Very good.
Right.
Well, thanks for being here. This has been fun.
Yeah, thank you for taking time to talk to us.
Yeah.
We've had a great time. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening today. Thanks to Alexa Larberg for editing and producing the podcast, and to Adriel Wiggins for doing the admin. If you want to support the podcast, you can find the link in the show notes or go to wishidknownforwriters.com/support. And all those notes will be there. We'll see y'all next week.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
And look for that Alien Invasion romantic
comedy. Yeah.
Pre-order now.
Makes a great gift.
Thanks for listening to the Wish I'd Known Then podcast. We hope this episode inspired you, empowered you, and made you laugh a little bit too. If you loved it, tell your friends about it. And if you feel so inclined, leave us a review. We look forward to being with you again next week.